Every lost pup ran to the rejected Omega, and when the Alpha King tracked her, he learned the secret. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Emily Carter had learned how to live quietly, the kind of quiet that doesn't invite questions or kindness, the kind that keeps you safe when a pack decides you are easier to forget than to understand. And on the far edge of Pine Hollow, just beyond the last lantern and the last judgmental glance, she kept a small cabin that leaned toward the creek as if listening for secrets. The elders called her a rejected Omega, a label spoken with lowered voices and quick looks away, and Emily carried it the way she carried water from the stream. Careful not to spill, careful not to complain, counting each step across the slick stones because one wrong move could mean a long fall. She was told not to attend ceremonies, told not to touch the pups, told that her presence unsettled the pack, and she believed them because believing was easier than fighting, and because the nights were long enough already. Then the first pup appeared, no bigger than a football, damp with morning mist, sitting on her porch like it had always known the way. Emily knelt, heart steady, voice soft, and offered a bowl of water, measuring out a cup because the vet in town once said small sips were best, and the pup drank without fear. By sunset another arrived, then another by dawn, their tiny paws padding across pine needles as if guided by a map only they could see, and Emily never chased them away. She cleaned burrs from fur with patient fingers, wrapped a light towel when the air dipped below 50 degrees, and hummed the same tune her mother used to hum when storms rolled in, a tune that made breathing slow and eyes grow heavy. Word spread the way rumors always do, crooked and loud. And soon the pack whispered that something was calling the lost pups, that a trail had formed from every hollow and ravine, that instinct itself was bending. Miles away, the Alpha King, Alexander Blackwood, felt it too, a pull sharp enough to stop him mid-step, a signal older than rules, and he followed it on foot, tracking prints measured in inches, not blood, moving with care because whatever waited ahead did not feel like a threat. From the trees he saw them, pups from different dens curled together on Emily's porch, sleeping as if guarded by an invisible wall, and he watched the Omega move among them with no claim and no command, only calm. The wind shifted, and Alexander learned the secret not with words but with silence, the kind that settles when something true has finally been found. Morning came softly to Pine Hollow, the kind of morning that felt borrowed rather than earned, with fog lifting in slow ribbons, and the creek murmuring like it had a secret to keep. Emily Carter woke before the sun fully cleared the trees, careful not to startle the small bodies tucked around her porch, and inside the open doorway, pups curled into warm commas against folded blankets and old flannel shirts. She counted them the way she counted breaths when the nights grew heavy, one by one, steady and calm, because counting made the world feel manageable. She warmed water on the stove, measured kibble by the cup, and tore soft pieces of bread to soak, mindful of little teeth and smaller stomachs, moving at a pace that never rushed because rushing made fear louder. When a pup stirred, she smiled without showing teeth, kept her voice low, and spoke names she made up on the spot, names that felt safe to say. By the time the sun painted the cabin wall with pale gold, more paw prints dotted the dirt, and Emily felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the worry that kindness always seemed to invite consequences. The pack would notice. They always did. By mid-morning, whispers traveled on the breeze, carried by people who did not knock and never stayed long, and Emily heard the words she had learned to ignore, careless and sharp, blaming her for things that had happened long before she learned how to be quiet. She did not argue. She gathered the pups into the shade, brushed leaves from fur, and reminded herself that safety was not a promise but a practice. From the trees, Alexander Blackwood remained still, watching the pattern form, noting how pups from different territories settled without challenge, how even the shy ones ventured closer when Emily hummed, and how the air around her held a steadiness that did not command but invited. He measured distance by steps and time by heartbeats, resisting the urge to announce himself because the scene felt fragile, like a balance that would tip if named too soon. His senses told him this was not coincidence. The pull he felt was not dominance or claim, but recognition, the kind that came when an old truth brushed against the present. He noticed the way Emily never flinched when a pup startled, how she turned her body to block the wind without thinking, how the smallest gestures changed the room, and he understood that the secret he followed was not something hidden on purpose, but something protected by neglect. Near noon, a pack messenger appeared at the edge of the clearing, posture stiff, voice formal, delivering warnings that sounded like rules, and Emily listened with her head bowed, hands busy refilling bowls, answering with simple acknowledgments that offered no openings. The messenger left with nothing to carry back, but confusion. As the afternoon warmed past 60 degrees, Emily moved the pups inside, counted again, and set up a rotation so each could rest, drink, and stretch without crowding. She worked as if she had always known how. As if care were a language, she spoke fluently while the rest of the world stumbled. Alexander stepped closer then, just enough to see her eyes when she looked up, and what he saw there stopped him more than any challenge ever had, not fear or ambition, but a resolve shaped by choosing gentleness when it cost more. He realized the packs had mistaken absence for emptiness, and that the trail he tracked led not to trouble, but to a threshold. As shadows lengthened and the first stars hinted through the canopy, the pups slept soundly, and Pine Hollow held its breath, waiting for the moment when watching would no longer be enough. The first sign that the forest itself had taken notice came with the evening wind, a gentle shift that carried unfamiliar scents and set the porch chimes humming in a slow, steady rhythm. Emily Carter noticed because she noticed everything that might unsettle the pups, pausing mid-step to read the air the way others read weather reports. She moved deliberately, closing the window an inch, spreading another blanket, and adjusting the lamp so its glow stayed soft, never harsh. Outside, paw prints overlapped in careful patterns, smaller tracks weaving among larger ones, all leading to the same place as if drawn by a promise rather than a path. Inside, the pups slept with the easy trust of those who had found safety, their breathing rising and falling in a quiet chorus that filled the cabin with a peace Emily had not known she missed. She sat at the small table with a notebook she used for lists and reminders, writing observations instead of fears, counting ounces of water consumed, noting which pup favored the corner near the hearth, which calmed fastest when she hummed, which needed a hand resting nearby to settle. She worked this way because attention had always been her armor. As dusk deepened, a lantern glow flickered at the tree lean and then vanished, and Emily felt the familiar pinch of worry but did not move toward it. She stayed where she was needed, trusting that whatever watched would choose its moment. Alexander Blackwood did, stepping closer only when the forest had gone still enough to hear the creek change tempo, marking time the way elders once did. He followed the pull to the cabin's edge and stopped, mindful of thresholds, observing how the air warmed near Emily without command or challenge. He had tracked many trails in his life, measured strength in miles covered in ground held, but this trail taught a different lesson, one written in inches and patience. He noticed the way Emily's shoulders eased when the pups settled, how her hands hovered rather than grasped, offering presence without claim. The realization settled slowly and firmly that what drew the pups was not protection enforced, but belonging offered, a refuge that did not ask for obedience. When a soft whine sounded near the door, Emily rose at once, opened it just enough, and guided the late arrival inside with a towel and a whisper, checking paws for burrs and eyes for fear. The pup pressed close and sighed, and the room seemed to breathe with it. From the shadows, Alexander felt the ancient recognition stir, not the urge to mark or command, but the responsibility to understand before acting. He remembered stories half-believed, told in careful tones, about a line that steadied the young and calmed the restless, a line that vanished not with fire, but with indifference. Watching Emily move, he understood how such a line could be hidden in plain sight, mistaken for weakness because it refused spectacle. A distant call echoed across Pine Hollow, answered by silence rather than challenge, and Alexander knew the packs would soon gather questions like kindling. He weighed the cost of timing, knowing that to step forward too soon would fracture the calm, and to wait too long would invite misunderstanding. Inside the cabin, Emily finished her notes and set the pencil down, listening to the night settle, aware without knowing why that a change hovered just beyond the lamplight. She looked toward the door, not with fear but with readiness, and the forest held, as if granting one more measure of grace before the truth would need a voice. The night gave way to a cool, clear dawn, and Emily Carter rose before the birds, careful with each step so the floor would not creak and wake the pups too soon. She checked the thermometer by the door, noted the steady 62 degrees, and cracked the window just enough to let fresh air roll through without a chill. The pups stirred in sequence, yawning and stretching as if following a quiet schedule they had agreed upon together, and Emily smiled at the small miracle of order. She prepared breakfast with the same patient care, measuring portions, warming water, and setting bowls in a wide arc so no one felt crowded. When the door opened to the morning, 2 more pups appeared at the edge of the clearing, hesitant but hopeful, and Emily knelt to their level, palms open, letting them decide the distance. They came on their own, tails wagging, relief written into every movement, and the circle widened. From the trees, Alexander Blackwood watched the pattern repeat, noting how each arrival eased the others, how tension dissolved rather than spread. He felt the pull again, stronger now, and recognized it not as a command but an invitation to witness a truth that could not be forced. As the sun climbed, the pack sent another messenger, this one younger, eyes uncertain, words careful. Emily listened without interruption, nodded once, and returned to her work, offering no argument and no apology, because the pups needed steadiness more than explanations. The messenger lingered, confused by the calm, and left with empty hands. Alexander stepped closer, crossing the invisible line where the forest yielded to the clearing, and the air seemed to settle around him, neither challenging nor retreating. He stopped where he stood, honoring the quiet, and waited. Emily sensed him then, not by sound but by the way the pups shifted their attention, glancing toward the trees and then back to her, as if checking permission. She rose slowly, wiped her hands on a towel, and turned, meeting Alexander's gaze without fear or claim. He inclined his head in greeting, a small gesture heavy with respect, and spoke her name as if it mattered. Emily answered simply, surprised by the ease of her voice, and asked if he would like water. The question landed softly, changing the shape of the moment, and Alexander felt the last of his assumptions fall away. He accepted, stepping no closer than invited, and noticed how the pups did not scatter or stiffen, how they remained at ease as if reassured by the exchange. He spoke of the trails he followed, of the prints that led him here, careful to keep his tone open, and Emily listened, eyes thoughtful, hands steady. She shared what she knew, which was not much, only that the pups came, that they calmed, that safety seemed to find them faster here than anywhere else. Alexander recognized the wisdom in that simplicity. The morning unfolded without hurry, and together they moved the pups into shade as the temperature rose, setting up a simple plan for the day that prioritized rest and water and space. When a breeze carried distant voices, Alexander positioned himself at the edge of the clearing, not as a barrier but as a presence, and the voices faded. Emily returned to her notes, adding a line she had not expected to write, that help had arrived without demanding control. As noon approached and the forest hummed with life, the clearing felt anchored, and Alexander understood that leadership sometimes began by listening, while Emily realized that being seen did not have to mean being taken. The pups slept again, bellies full, and Pine Hollow seemed to agree that this balance was worth protecting. By mid-afternoon the calm began to tighten, not with noise but with numbers, as footsteps circled the clearing at a respectful distance, and familiar scents layered the air with concern and curiosity. Emily Carter noticed the change immediately, the way the pups lifted their heads, and then settled again when she rested a hand nearby, trusting her to read what they could not. She adjusted the schedule, moving bowls closer to the shade and setting a soft barrier of crates to keep pathways clear, thinking in inches and minutes, because small choices kept things from spiraling. Alexander Blackwood felt it too, the pressure of attention building beyond the trees, and he weighed the moment with care, knowing that authority could quiet a crowd but also harden it. He chose patience, remaining present without display, answering questions only when asked and deflecting others with a calm that set a tone. Word traveled anyway, faster than sense, and by late afternoon a cluster formed at the edge of Pine Hollow. Voices measured but insistent, asking why so many pups gathered here and whether the balance of the packs was being disturbed. Emily did not engage the debate. She focused on the pups, guiding them through a gentle walk to stretch legs and ease restlessness, counting steps and offering praise in a voice that stayed even. When one stumbled, she waited until it stood again on its own, reinforcing confidence without carrying, a habit learned from watching storms pass. Alexander observed the method, recognizing a leadership that taught resilience without fear. He stepped forward then, not to claim but to clarify, speaking of tracking patterns and shared responsibility, of how safety found its way to the quiet places first, and the crowd listened because his tone left no room for blame. The questions softened but did not vanish, replaced by a worry about what came next. Emily felt that worry like a change in weather, and she acknowledged it with a nod, suggesting practical steps for the night. A rotation for watch that emphasized presence rather than patrol, distances measured in yards rather than lines drawn in sand. The suggestion landed because it solved a problem without naming an enemy. As the sun dipped and the temperature slid toward 58 degrees, lanterns flickered on and off, and the clearing took on a careful order. The pups curled together again. A living map of trust that refused to align by pack, and more than one watcher noticed how that quiet unity eased their own breathing. Alexander stood at the perimeter, answering a final question about his intentions with honesty, saying he intended to learn before he led, and the honesty disarmed what authority alone might not. When the last onlooker drifted away, Emily released a breath she had been holding all day, not out of relief but readiness, knowing the calm had been earned and would need tending. She checked her notes, added times and temperatures, and looked up to find Alexander waiting at a respectful distance, eyes thoughtful rather than demanding. He asked what she needed for the night, and the simplicity of the question surprised her. She answered plainly, more blankets, clean water, and space to keep the routine intact. He agreed without negotiation, arranging help that followed her plan rather than replacing it. As stars pricked the sky and the forest settled into its night rhythm, the tension eased into purpose, and Pine Hollow felt steadier for it. Emily realized that being supported did not mean being overshadowed, and Alexander understood that the trail he tracked had led him not to a secret to seize, but a trust to protect. The night settled fully over Pine Hollow, cool and steady, and Emily Carter moved through it with a lantern held low, careful not to cast sharp shadows that might startle the pups. She checked water levels, felt foreheads with the back of her fingers, and adjusted blankets by inches, listening for the small sounds that meant comfort rather than distress. The routine grounded her, even as she sensed the forest paying closer attention, the way crickets paused and resumed, the way the creek seemed to hush when a cloud passed over the moon. Alexander Blackwood kept watch from the perimeter, not standing guard so much as sharing the quiet, noting how the clearing breathed when Emily passed through it. He learned more by observing than he ever had by issuing orders, understanding that calm could be taught if it was first embodied. Near midnight, a soft chorus of whines rose and fell, not in alarm, but in response to a distant call that carried uncertainty. Emily answered with her voice, low and even, repeating the same phrase until the pups settled again, and Alexander felt the pull. Ease as if a knot had loosened. He recognized then that the secret he sought was not a power that flared but a steadiness that endured, something the young responded to because it did not ask them to prove anything. When a light rain began, measured and brief, Emily moved without hurry, closing flaps, shifting mats, keeping the temperature comfortable as it dipped toward 54 degrees. Alexander assisted where invited, holding a lantern, fetching towels, never taking over, and the trust between them grew in the small spaces where consent lived. As the rain passed, the clouds thinned and the stars returned, brighter for the interruption, and the pups slept deeper than before. In the quiet that followed, Alexander spoke softly, sharing fragments of what he knew, stories passed down about a line that made safe places without walls, a line thought gone because it did not fight to be seen. Emily listened, recognizing herself in the margins of those stories without claiming them, and said only that she did what needed doing because someone had to. The simplicity of it struck him harder than any legend. Before dawn, a change rippled through the clearing as a few pups lifted their heads and turned toward the forest, alert but unafraid, and Emily watched closely, ready to intervene if needed. Instead, the pups waited, then relaxed, as if reassured by a presence that had checked in and moved on. Alexander felt the echo of that presence, familiar and ancient, and understood that the forest itself had accepted Emily's work. When the sky lightened to slate and the birds began their first calls, Emily prepared for morning, setting out fresh water and planning the day, her notes precise and practical. Alexander made a decision then, not announced but settled, that whatever came next would protect the routine that kept these young safe. As the sun edged up and warmed the clearing past 58 degrees, the pups stirred, stretching and yawning, and Emily greeted them one by one, her smile quiet and real. Alexander stood back and watched the scene complete itself, knowing that the truth he had learned would ask more of him than command ever could, and that honoring it meant choosing patience again and again. The realization did not arrive all at once, but gathered like light at the edge of morning, clear enough to change the day. Without announcing itself, Emily Carter felt it first as a quiet certainty while she refreshed the water bowls and marked the temperature at 61 degrees, noticing how the pups oriented themselves when Alexander Blackwood passed, not with submission, but with a calm acknowledgement that mirrored their response to her. They did not scatter or crowd him. They simply made space, an instinctive courtesy that spoke of recognition rather than fear. Alexander felt the same recognition settle in his chest, steady and undeniable, as he watched the pups move between them as if the space itself had learned their measure. He asked Emily if she would walk with him along the creek, not away from the clearing but around it, keeping the routine intact, and she agreed, leaving the pups in the care of a familiar helper who followed her instructions precisely. As they walked, Alexander spoke carefully, sharing what he had pieced together from patterns and old records, from the way the young sought safety without being taught where to find it. He described a lineage that did not rule by force but anchored places, a presence that quieted panic and gathered the lost, a line once honored, and then overlooked because it refused spectacle. Emily listened, gaze on the water, hands relaxed at her sides, absorbing the words without rushing to accept them. She had learned the cost of names when used carelessly. Alexander did not press. He offered observations instead, how the pups slept deeper near her, how disputes softened before they formed, how the forest itself seemed to agree. When Emily finally spoke, she did not claim a heritage. She spoke of her mother's habits, of keeping doors open, of humming during storms, of choosing patience because it worked, and Alexander heard the echo he needed. They returned to the clearing as the sun climbed higher, warming the air to 64 degrees, and the pups greeted them with quiet enthusiasm, tails tapping the ground in soft rhythms. Alexander watched Emily kneel to check a paw and understood that the secret was not power waiting to be unleashed, but responsibility waiting to be named. He addressed the gathered helpers with a calm clarity, explaining that the pups would be returned to their packs in time, guided gently and without pressure, and that the clearing would remain a place of transition, not possession. The plan was practical, measured in days and miles, and it eased the remaining tension because it honored what already worked. As the afternoon wore on, messengers arrived with softened expressions, bringing supplies and questions rather than accusations, and Alexander answered without claiming credit. He deferred to Emily on matters of care, and each time he did, the forest seemed to settle further into alignment. Emily felt the weight of attention and did not shy from it, but she shaped it with boundaries, insisting on rest periods and quiet hours, protecting the routine that protected the pups. When a single pup trotted back from the treeline after a brief absence, healthy and content, Emily noted the time and smiled, and Alexander recognized the moment as confirmation. By evening, the truth had spread without being proclaimed, carried in changed behavior and easier breathing, and Emily stood at the edge of the clearing with Alexander beside her, watching the pups sleep. He spoke then, softly, acknowledging what he had learned and what it asked of him, and Emily met his gaze with a steady acceptance that required no vow. The secret had been learned, not taken, and Pine Hollow held it gently, ready for what patience would make possible next. The gathering at Pine Hollow took shape without a summons, formed by habit and curiosity rather than command. As helpers arrived at respectful intervals and settled into the roles Emily Carter had outlined. The air warmed to 66 degrees, and the clearing felt organized without feeling owned, a balance that Alexander Blackwood recognized as rare. He stood beside Emily while she demonstrated the next steps for reuniting the pups, explaining how short walks would help them orient, how scent exchanges would be gradual, how rest would be protected above all else. People listened because the method had already proven itself, and because the pups responded to her voice with easy confidence. When a question rose about authority, Alexander answered plainly that authority here meant responsibility, and that responsibility belonged to whoever the pups trusted to keep them calm. The words settled the group, not as a decree, but as permission to follow what worked. As the afternoon progressed, a small procession began, not of removal but of return, with pairs of pups guided toward familiar paths at measured distances, never rushed, never carried unless needed. Emily walked the first stretch with them, timing pauses, offering water, watching tails lift as recognition dawned, and then she stopped, letting the forest finish what she had begun. Alexander watched the process with care, noting how each success reduced the need for oversight, how confidence replaced worry. When a hesitant pup paused at the edge of the clearing and looked back, Emily knelt and nodded once, and the pup trotted on, choice intact. That moment carried more weight than any announcement could have. By late afternoon, the clearing held fewer pups, and those remaining slept in looser clusters, the tension eased by progress. Alexander approached Emily then, choosing his words with intention, and asked if she would accept a formal acknowledgement of her role, not as a title to wear, but as protection for the work she did. Emily considered, eyes on the creek, and answered that acknowledgement mattered only if it preserved the routine and kept the space open. Alexander agreed without hesitation, promising to anchor policy to practice rather than the other way around. The agreement shifted something subtle and lasting, and the helpers sensed it, adjusting their posture, their voices, their expectations. As evening drew near and the temperature dipped towards 62 degrees, lanterns were lit again, fewer than before, and the clearing felt spacious rather than empty. Alexander addressed those present one final time, thanking them for restraint and patience, and reminding them that calm was contagious when modeled. He did not mention lineage or destiny, and the omission felt right. Emily returned to her notes, recording times and distances, the success of each return, and the condition of each pup that remained overnight. When she finished, she closed the notebook and looked up to find Alexander waiting, hands relaxed, expression open. He asked how she felt about the night ahead, and she answered honestly that she felt ready, not alone. The words landed with quiet force. Together they walked the perimeter once more, confirming the plan, and then Alexander stepped back, taking his place at the edge rather than the center. The forest hummed with acceptance, the creek keeping time, and Pine Hollow settled into a calm that felt earned. Emily watched the last light fade through the trees and knew that whatever recognition came next would be measured not in ceremony, but in the continued safety of the young, and Alexander understood that leadership had found its proper shape by standing beside her rather than above. The final morning at Pine Hollow arrived bright and clear, the temperature easing towards 68 degrees as sunlight filtered through the canopy and touched the clearing with a gentle warmth. Emily Carter rose early, as she always did, and walked the familiar circuit with a calm that felt earned, checking water, straightening blankets, and greeting the remaining pups with the same quiet affection she had offered from the beginning. There were fewer now, and the space felt open rather than empty, shaped by the work completed rather than the absence left behind. One by one, the last pups prepared to leave, guided by patient steps and careful pauses, each departure marked not by urgency, but by readiness. Emily watched them go with a steady heart, knowing that safety did not require holding on. Alexander Blackwood stood beside her, attentive without pressing, and when the final pup trotted down the familiar path and vanished into the trees, the forest seemed to exhale. The clearing held silence for a moment, not hollow but full, and Emily closed her notebook, satisfied with the record it held. Alexander broke the quiet with a simple acknowledgement. thanking her for teaching him what leadership looked like when it chose listening over force. He spoke of plans to protect places like Pine Hollow, to codify patience into practice, to ensure that calm would be resourced rather than overlooked. Emily listened, considering the shape of the future he described, and agreed to continue her work as long as it remained grounded in routine and consent. The agreement felt less like a contract and more like alignment. As the day unfolded, helpers drifted away with lighter steps, carrying stories not of spectacle, but of a place that worked because it was allowed to. Alexander made his departure last, offering Emily the space she preferred, and when he did turn to leave, he paused at the edge of the clearing, meeting her gaze with a promise shaped by action rather than words. The forest received him without resistance, and Pine Hollow returned to its steady rhythm. Emily spent the afternoon restoring the cabin to its usual quiet, washing bowls, folding blankets, and airing the room until the scent of care lingered without effort. She brewed tea and sat on the porch, watching light move across the creek, aware of a presence that no longer needed to stand beside her to be felt. As evening approached and the temperature dipped gently, a familiar calm settled in, deeper now, reinforced by trust. Emily reflected on how the label she once carried had failed to define her, and how being seen had not required a stage. When stars emerged and the first night sounds began their chorus, she felt no loneliness, only readiness for whatever the next call might be. Somewhere beyond the trees, Alexander carried the lesson forward, reshaping paths and policies with the memory of a clearing that taught him patience. Pine Hollow remained, open and quiet, a place where the lost had found their way without being told where to go. Emily stood and turned back inside, closing the door with a gentle click, knowing that the work she did would continue to ripple outward, not as a secret kept, but as a truth lived, and that the forest would remember her not by name or title, but by the safety it learned to offer in her presence.